On today's Transport Evolved, new pro-Tesla builds in New Jersey, Nissan recalls the Leaf, the Ampera's price gets slashed in Europe, and Ford one-ups Cadillac. These stories and more coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 193 of Transport Evolved, recorded on the 28th of March 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
And I'm Mark Chatterley. How are you today, Nikki?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. Very tired. It's been a busy week in the world of electric cars. I missed you last week, by the way, but I just want to say thank you for doing an amazing Google Hangout. I was so blown away.
It wasn't me.
Really,
It was
really
all
good.
Deb. It was all the wonderful guests.
I think you both did an amazing job. And I was sat there on a train, and we'd made the decision beforehand that I wasn't going to take part because I was coming back from an event on a British Rail train, no longer British Rail, First Great Western train, from London back to Bristol. And the wireless GPRS Wi-Fi signal on that train is pretty rubbish. My tethering on my iPhone that creates the Wi-Fi is pretty rubbish. The 3G connectivity to the cell towers generally pretty rubbish. But I watched you pretty much solidly all the way from London to just outside my house. I think it was just a ploy to get me off the show, but you did a really good job.
I'm taking over, Nikki. It's all mine now.
It's the Mark Show with Nikki doing the button pressing. All right, Mark, who we got on the show today then?
We have one of our best ever recurring guests, the amazing John Voelcker from America. I can't exactly remember which part of America because I'm terrible with geography, but he basically runs Green Car Reports and brings us all the wonderful electric car news, especially with a US focus, which is where I get all my US information from. And get it from people who know. That's the way to do it.
And John is in the Catskills at the moment, I'm guessing, John.
Yes, I'm up in the mountains. Sorry about the glare on my spectacles for those of you who can see me. Otherwise, you get sort of a dark, shadowy me. But yes, up in the mountains where it's raining, although we still have a foot of wet, slushy snow on the ground. And it's Eastern time zone. So, Mark, you can just think of me as sort of in the bit east of the Mississippi.
And John is currently 4 hours behind us. But as of Sunday, we get on to summertime, so we'll be 5 hours apart again, which is great. And I've just switched glasses because my glasses were doing weird things, and I've switched to my reading glasses because I have my show notes on my Kindle, and I realised I can't read them unless I wear my reading glasses, which is very sad. Anyway, we've got some great news today, and I think one of the things that's shocked me about this show, as always with Transport Evolved and the news cycle, is that you can get up on a Friday morning and the news that you cover, that you're expecting to cover, is all light-hearted stuff because it's a Friday. But that definitely wasn't the case today, was it, John? Would have been about 11:30 my time this morning. I got an email from Tesla, which would have been 6:30 this morning your time, John?
Yeah, actually, it was about 7:30.
Right.
I hadn't actually reset the clock, so I was an hour behind. But I was just awake enough to see this thing land from Tesla, and so we hurried out the story fairly quickly.
So this is a story that revolves around the Tesla Model S, obviously Tesla's flagship luxury premium electric sedan, and the very, very large battery pack, either a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack or an 85 kilowatt hour battery pack, which lives underneath the car, or is actually part of the underbody of the car. I don't know quite how to describe it because it's not underneath the car. It's part of the car's structural body, isn't it, John?
It is. It's technically under the floor pan.
Right.
Your feet rest on a floor pan, and it's underneath that with some, I think they said ceramic and steel fire prevention between the floor pan and you. But What they announced today was actually that they have been building since March 6th a new additional armoring system underneath the battery pack for cars they've been building in California for about 3 weeks now. And they're going to offer this to all existing Model S owners, either when their car comes in for its regularly scheduled maintenance, or if the owner wants it beforehand. They didn't give any information on supplies or timing for that. They're going to have to make about 30,000 of these retrofit kits for all the Model S's out there. But it's actually a 3-part armoring system.
Titanium in the middle. So aluminum, titanium, and aluminum, or aluminium if you're in the UK. And this is a direct response to 2 incidences that happened last year, John, in the US. Both on the West Coast, am I right in believing that? I can't remember now. In which debris hit.
I can't remember either, unfortunately.
In which debris hit the underside of a Tesla Model S traveling at speed. In both cases, it was, I believe, metallic debris. It punctured the underside of the car and up into the battery pack. Now, we should point out at this point that the battery pack has always had ballistic aluminium shielding underneath it to protect it from the road. But these objects came in, they pierced through that into the battery pack, protruded into the battery pack, caused a short circuit. The cars very politely told their respective owners, I think you need to pull over now. Please, now. The owners pulled over at the side of the road. They got out of the car, and then there was a fire that started in both cases, which appears to be self-contained because the Model S has an expanding foam within the battery pack, so that if there is a fire, this foam solidifies and prevents the fire from expanding. That's what I understand it to be. Today's announcement is a response to that, and is kind of considered to be a bit of a belt and braces approach, John. So run us through what Tesla's done over the last year to try and address this problem.
Sure. It turned out that the 2 on-road incidents, and I should point out there was the 3rd fire from a Tesla in Mexico that had been stolen, run off the road at high speed, I think 100 miles an hour or so, gone through a reinforced concrete wall and done some other stuff, which is a circumstance under which you would expect any car to sustain damage and perhaps catch fire. But in any event, Tesla led off its release by saying that no one has been injured or killed in any Tesla so far, which is true. And I think not something that necessarily got carried in the mainstream media. But still, electric cars and fire are one of those memes, and the factory really knows it has to go beyond possibly what any other company does in order to reassure the public and its clients. So these 3 pieces of the additional armoring, there's a sort of an aluminum tube or aluminium at the front that either absorbs some of the energy from a piece of road debris that may strike the underside of the car, or in certain circumstances actually directs it upwards before the battery pack, before it hits the battery pack, effectively into the front trunk compartment. Tesla noted that you might actually pierce the plastic inner liner of this front compartment and damage the car, but better that than hitting the battery pack.
Right.
Then the second bit is a titanium shield over some portion of the front half of the car, both protecting against damage to the front, certain elements of the front suspension, and I assume perhaps electronics, I'm not sure, and a bit of the battery pack as well. And then the third element at the rear is sort of an upside down wedge, so that if there is an object, as Tesla said, that is uncompressible and fixed in the roadway, it simply sort of rides the car up and over that object, so that object doesn't hit the battery pack itself. And Tesla put out a number of videos with high-speed cameras mounted underneath the car, showing the car hitting any number of interesting objects, including a concrete block a trailer hitch with a tow ball, and so on.
Well, we're looking at the trailer hitch right now, and it shows obviously how the hitch is being driven up. You're looking at the car, I presume, I would like to say, from the front right-hand bumper area, looking towards the left front wheel, and obviously you can see towards the back of the car. And this is an animated GIF that Tesla has provided that shows this tow hitch being picked up by the car and then sent on its merry way. Now the plastic itself is flexing, but nothing else.
And you can see the force of it. That a rivet or a screw or something like that pops out of one side of the shield, nearer to the camera. So the impact of that object going up and being levered under is so much. It's ripping what I guess is something that's screwed in.
What you're seeing there, Mark, is actually the plastic underbody panel. So you've got this plastic underbody panel that you would see from outside. And you make a really good point, actually, because I bet now people are going to look under Tesla Model S's and go, well, there's no titanium there. But what it actually is that there's you've got this triple layer titanium aluminium sandwich hidden away. John, under the front of the car, sort of where the radiator is, I would suspect.
Right.
And then you've got this plastic aerodynamic panel, and that's function is just to make the car look good and to help it, obviously, with aerodynamics. So what you saw there was the fastening.
That piece essentially is sacrificial.
Right.
In the event of one of these unusual incidents.
So what you're seeing there, Mark, is just a standard automotive fastener popping out.
Okay.
You can get them for you can get a bag of them for $1 at your local car emporium. But the actual proper shield is hidden underneath. And I guess maybe that's part of my disappointment of seeing these videos, is you don't actually get to see the shield doing its thing. You just get to see the bit of debris.
And we don't get to see the after effects. So does the shield, after it's smashed that concrete block or with the tow hitch, do you then need to put another shield in, or is that shield ready to be reused, or what happens then is some information we haven't got yet. But
yes,
there's a great deal of information that Tesla hasn't released with this announcement, as is its wont.
Yes.
Nikki and I joked earlier today that when Tesla goes silent for a while, you know something's up.
Yeah.
Tesla hasn't answered a single question from Green Car Reports in about 2 months.
Or us, actually. And we did. It was yesterday or the day before, John. We were talking on Skype, as we do quite regularly, and we both said something's up at Tesla. It was almost like seeing the birds flying in the opposite direction and knowing there was a storm coming. It was a bit like that. It has been a bit like that with Tesla lately. It's been quiet, and we generally know when Tesla goes quiet, it means there's a big story coming. Maybe we should time it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think, if anything, the word titanium, which was in their headline and mine, titanium is known as a really strong material, and the notion of titanium battery pack armor is a sort of a message that does sound very strong and impermeable.
Yeah.
I suspect most of the engineering details, I was sort of intrigued by this idea of riding the car up over something. It's actually sort of a smart way to solve that problem when your entire underside of the car is the battery pack that you don't want to pierce. But this is a fairly strong announcement to me.
Yes.
And I suspect that it should go a long way, assuming that, you don't get anybody barbecued in a Tesla. This should go a long way toward alleviating this sort of constant Tesla catch on fire nonsense.
And I
was just going to say, I've got one question, because you're both automotive veterans and you understand these things better than I do. With the safety tests that come with cars, is there a safety test that looks at pedestrians going underneath a car, being hit head on and going underneath a car? Because when you see the concrete block, which is kind of head shaped, go under and it just shatters, I wondered, does this adjustment mean that they then have to get recertified for some sort of safety test if in case a pedestrian gets trapped under the car, or does that not matter? Is that not something that's tested for?
I can take that one.
Go on, John.
In Europe, there are pedestrian crash tests, and there's a set of regulations for cars sold in Europe about what happens when a head hits the hood or bonnet, which is to say there has to be enough crush space under there where the top of your engine block isn't a quarter of an inch away and the head essentially goes into a solid, unyielding object. That's required some redesign of some vehicles. But pedestrian car accidents are much more common in Europe than they are in the US, largely because fewer people walk in the US because we have many more dispersed suburbs.
Yes.
We do not have here that particular pedestrian crash test, but the European standards are designed to ensure that if a car hits a person, the person goes up and onto the hood and potentially windshield and not underneath, which is actually why they took the old London taxis out of service, because it
pushed people under.
They were sort of upright enough in the front that it wasn't entirely clear that in the tests as they were structured, the crash dummy was going to go up and onto the bonnet instead of underneath.
As somebody who's gone up and over a bonnet, I'm quite glad that I went that way and not the other. Because actually, I think my sister, this is back in the well, this is a good point. I mean, back in it would have been 1988, I think it was. One of my sisters got in a car accident. She was on a bicycle, and she's on one of those old classic 1920s sit up and beg bicycles, and a car hit her head on. And I think it went over her rather than she over it. She broke her collarbone. About a decade and a half later, I had a car accident. It was a much lower speed. A car hit me and I was on a bike and I went over the bonnet. So maybe it was luck, but maybe that's also part of the crash relations. Moving on with this story though, John, there was a related piece of news today about this. At the same time as Tesla sort of publicly said, okay, we're investigating the fires, NHTSA turned around at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which is one of your US safety bodies for ensuring road safety of vehicles, said we are launching an official investigation into these incidents. This morning, or was it yesterday, NHTSA said, we've concluded our investigations and we found... What was the phrase they used? The
phrase was...
defect trend.
A defect has not been identified.
Right.
Officially, they simply closed their investigation. And there's no sort of official verdict, but they said we did not identify a specific defect in these cars. Tesla had actually asked the NHTSA to investigate. It says, although the NHTSA, under its previous administrator, said, hey, wait a second, we don't get asked, we decide. Putting the posturing aside, this is good news. I find it a little interesting that the two announcements came out on the same day.
Yeah.
I don't know what sort of deal there could have been between NHTSA and the car maker. It was not referred to from either party, but as we said, there's a lot that was not contained in Tesla's press release.
NHTSA did reference the enhanced shielding or the enhanced barrier in their statements. Yes. So they definitely knew about this before anyone else did. So I don't know, like you say, there's not been enough information to guess, but it looks like there has been some agreement between the two parties, I suppose.
One might surmise a quid pro quo.
Now, sorry, I was going to say, John, a slightly more interesting conundrum question that we've all talked about today is the one of not so much of timing, because the Tesla has a habit of posting things very late at night on the Pacific coast time, or in fact very early British time, which is one of the reasons why Transport Evolved sometimes gets to lead with stories, because everybody's still awake, and there's this golden hour between the West Coast going to sleep and John Voelcker at Green Car Reports not waking up yet. Where if we're in the right place at the right time, we get the story. But we all commented this morning. Tesla normally makes official notifications and posts on its blog section of its own corporate website. Now, Elon Musk, if he's writing about Tesla, it's always done through the blog. But today it wasn't, was it? It was done through a third-party site, John. And this really caught you out.
Yes, although I think I might have figured out in the interim. As you noticed, the blog post had in it, 3 or 4 different sort of video loops of these crash tests. I'm simply wondering if, given the general interest in Tesla, the article we did is top of our charts at the moment, that they were simply worried that everybody hitting the servers to watch these videos might, in fact, overwhelm whatever server they have their blog posts on, since it's multiple streaming video loops. And they simply jobbed it out to another site that had more robust servers.
Although, admittedly, we are hosting them on our site at the moment because they're only about 700k each, Mark.
Yeah, but I to be fair, I have already seen them been reddited several different times. They're on the front page of Reddit. I mean, we're on the front page of a couple of subs, but the GIFs themselves are on the front page of Reddit at the moment. So
interesting.
700 kilobytes being hit by 250,000 people.
That's quite a lot. All right, moving on to our final story of the segment, and we're going to stay with safety and recalls. Although we should note, that was a quick question I was going to ask. This is not an official recall, is it, John? It's not being set up as a recall, and I don't know if this is Tesla not saying this is not a recall. Certainly NHTSA hasn't said it's a recall. This seems to be Tesla going, we've changed the way we're making the cars and we're offering this upgrade for free, but they're not calling it a recall.
Yes, and to be fair, that's exactly the model that happened a couple of years ago with the Chevrolet Volt. When the Volt fire occurred, after a Volt had been involved in a crash test, rotated 90, 180, 270, and 360 degrees on a rotisserie, and then parked in a junkyard and caught fire a couple of days later, there was a big hoo-ha, including congressional hearings, over Volt fires. There's a pattern here. As those of us who cover this know by now. And NHTSA did a similar investigation. They, again, found sort of no defect, but Chevrolet came out with an optional retrofit that replaced a couple pieces of the battery pack, put a couple of small reinforcements under the car, and essentially said, this is optional for owners. We're building it into all the new ones. We will happily retrofit it if owners ask us for it. I don't have data, but if I recall, a very, very, very small number of Volt owners actually took them up on that offer. But that is the same model that it appears Tesla and NHTSA have followed.
Very interesting. Well, let's move on to the Leaf story. We did kind of allude to it there a second, and then I realised I'd forgotten to ask you about the recall question. This week, Nissan announced an official recall of its 2013-14 Leaf. About 29,000, couple of hundred in the US, out of a total of more than 1 million cars worldwide. So this is not just a Leaf problem, this is a Nissan problem. And it's to do with something called OCS, which is Occupant Certification System, John?
Was it OCS? It's basically the passive restraint system, better known to everybody as airbags.
Right. So it's a little switch and a computer program that decides whether the front passenger seat is occupied or not. And if the front passenger seat is not, it won't deploy the airbags.
That's right. And that's sort of a new piece of safety gear that was added within the last decade. We've had 2 airbags in cars now for going on 20 years. But the concern was if you had a small child in the front seat, the airbag... they now have 2-stage airbags where they sort of look at what's in the front seat. If there's nothing in the front seat, the airbag won't go off. If there is, a full-size person, it goes off at one strength, etc. The defect in the Leaf and about 1 million other Nissan vehicles built in their Smyrna factory and sold in North America was that some of the software programming was not quite correct, so that under certain unusual circumstances, known as edge cases, the airbag on the passenger side might not trigger even if there were a person in that seat. And so it's going to be a software update. Unlike Tesla, Nissan, the rest of the automaker world do not do over-the-air updates. So this will be done at a dealer.
Go to your dealer. They'll do it for free. And recalls are due to start next month, middle of next month. So in about 2 weeks' time. As far as I can tell, no other Nissan manufactured vehicles from elsewhere in the world seem to be affected. This is, as you say, it's only the Tennessean.
This is essentially a North American spec airbag system,
right? And the fault itself, the system is just basically a load switch, and it's just deciding not to set the airbags off. Now, we should point out at this point that NHTSA has said that there were 2 incidences in which Nissan vehicles were involved in accidents, and the passenger airbag system did not properly deploy. I don't believe there were any fatalities. I don't think there were any major injuries, and Nissan didn't say whether this was these were Leafs or whether they were other vehicles. Given the numbers involved, I would suspect it's other vehicles, but I can't say for sure. Interestingly, it also involves the NV200 taxi, Infinity vehicles. I mean, it's across the board. Now, I would be interested to know if the NV200 taxi cabs are under obligation to get their fix sooner because they are licensed to carry members of the public.
I know in the UK, at least, private hire taxi companies at least have to get their cars checked every 2 or 3 months.
Huh.
So they're already getting serviced on a more regular basis. So I don't know if there'd be a obligation for them to come in sooner, but they would probably end up having it done sooner just because their car would be in the garage more often.
John,
I'm not aware of any North American regulation to that effect, and
right.
Taxis are regulated locally, city by city. The number of Nissan taxis is also really quite low. It makes the number of Leafs look stupendous.
Yeah.
My bet is, I don't know, but they may have built 1,000 taxis. So,
well, I must say, John, when I was in New York about a month ago, I saw in New York and New Jersey and in DC, I saw more NV200s sitting on dealer lots than I saw on the road. So,
indeed.
No, I think that sort of says everything it needs to. We're going to have an ad break. We'll be right back. So stay put. If you're watching this live, there won't be an ad break. If you're watching it on the YouTube afterwards, there will be. Please watch the ad because it helps us. We're back with Mr. John Voelcker from Green Car Reports, and of course Mark and myself, regulars from the Transport Evolved editorial team, talking you through the week's news in the world of green and plug-in vehicles. In the second section, we're now going to talk about New Jersey and Mr. Christie, Governor Chris Christie, to give him his full title, and the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission. Back at on the 11th of March, there was a vote by the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission to essentially make it impossible for Tesla come April 1st to sell direct to customers in the state. And as a consequence, Tesla would be forced to close its Tesla stores, turn them into Tesla galleries, where people can go and get information on the car, but they can't actually order one or buy one. We'll ask John in a minute about Tesla galleries because he did an excellent article on it about a year ago over at Green Car Reports. But this week, it looks like Governor Chris Christie, who had previously said if people don't like it, they need to change the legislature and challenge Tesla to talk to the 120 elected members of the New Jersey legislature to change the law. And already there are 2 bills going through the New Jersey houses, the lower and the upper house, to do just that. John, tell us briefly what a Tesla gallery is before we talk about this a bit more.
Sure. Tesla is using something analogous to the model that Apple Computer uses. And in fact, the stores were designed by the same person. I think you did an article for us on that. But essentially, they have Tesla stores or galleries in malls, usually higher-end malls, where lots of people come. Being that they're electric cars, there are no emissions, so they don't actually drive the cars around the malls, but they can sort of move them in and out of the malls as needed. And the goal really is to make large numbers of the public aware that electric cars exist, that they're good-looking and practical and so on, and really just to do the education process. And there's some fairly staggering numbers of the millions of people who've been through Tesla stores. But Tesla's model is not to have traditional franchise dealers. Instead, you go to a Tesla store, you educate yourself about the car, you decide what you might want. They can arrange for you to have a test drive, and then you order your Tesla online from the factory over that internet thing. The difference between a store and a gallery, as far as I can understand it, is that at a store, you actually can go onto a computer there and order the car, as opposed to going home and going onto a computer and ordering the car. The relevant bits of the legislation that are tougher effectively say that no car maker may sell cars directly to consumers in the state. And this is a historical sort of thing where franchise dealers were worried that big automakers would go into competition, set up their own stores, undercut them on price to end their businesses. There was some reason behind the legislation. I think we've gone over this in prior shows, but Tesla has no franchise dealers, so there's no one to protect. And yet the dealers seem to feel quite existentially threatened and are going state by state and sort of forbidding Tesla from doing anything except having to use dealerships.
And it's a very interesting story, because this week, or at the end of last week, a leaf driving Democratic Assemblyman by the name of Timothy Eustace submitted a bill to the Assembly in New Jersey, and the bill would essentially reverse the ban on Tesla stores in New Jersey and make it possible for Tesla to sell direct to customers. At the same time, because for those who don't understand the American political system, and I don't really either, so please correct me if I get this wrong, John, you've got two different houses in all bar, is it Nebraska that has one house?
You may well be ahead of me on American state political structures there. I am not aware of all 50 of them, but in general, states do have, like our federal system, states tend to have two houses, one based proportionally on sort of population, and the other one based on counties or other such things.
Right.
Anyway,
and so Assemblyman Tim Eustace is in one, and then he has a colleague in the Senate who is pushing through an amendment to a bill that would make it okay for Tesla to sell in state, essentially an exception, which is great news. And we actually spoke with Tim Eustace this week, and he gave us some fantastic quotes. I can't put the telephone interview up, but essentially a transcript of the interview, or some of the quotes he gave us in the interview are up on our website. So go to www.transportevolved.com. He's been talking very openly this week to various local news organisations about it, and I'm hoping some of my other colleagues in the EV world are going to get a chance to talk with him soon about this. He's very much supporting Tesla. He's on his second Nissan Leaf. He said, we should be supporting these new business models because a new business model is never a bad idea. And I think there are lots of people who feel the same way. In addition, there are rumours that Tesla has been given an additional 15 days of grace to operate within the state of New Jersey. In other words, instead of it being the 1st of April, it's now the 15th of April. Now, this is a story that came in today from CNN. I haven't had a chance to read this properly or digest it. John, have you?
I'm afraid I haven't. And just to clarify, pretty much anyone can show cars, and many Americans will be familiar with some local dealership parking cars in the aisle of the nearby mall. It's more a question of transacting the sale. Really, the sticking point for car dealers is that they don't want actual car buyers buying cars directly from the people who make them. They want to interpose an independently owned third party, which is to say the dealership,
right,
a franchised dealership, into the middle of that equation. I don't know if we have time to go into some of the arguments they make. They're rather fun on their own. But,
go on. Let's give a couple of them quickly. Yeah.
Okay. And this comes from an interview I did about a year ago with the head of the Colorado Auto Dealer Association, who very quietly passed this kind of law back in 2010. So Tesla has been stuck with a single location in Colorado ever since. He was very proud of it. And he said the three reasons are, number one, when Tesla goes out of business, I mean, if, those were his words, dealers will be there to provide parts and service to bereft owners, whereas if they've bought a car from Tesla, Tesla simply closes up its service centers and goes away, and they are forlorn and abandoned. That's a lovely argument, and to greater or lesser extent, it worked with Saab and Suzuki and Isuzu and so on, except the counter argument is Fisker, where in fact that didn't happen at all, and people who bought a $106,000 car went back to the dealer 4 months later and discovered there was no dealer, and the dealer essentially said, sorry. Number two, Tesla has much better things to do with its capital than build stores and service centers, and they ought to job that out to dealers who are used to doing this sort of thing, and Elon Musk is doing a disservice to his shareholders. I'm not sure how much Elon Musk really values the input of auto dealers, but I'm sure he noticed that. And number three, when Tesla goes out of business, or if, again, his words, not mine, because Americans don't understand the difference between how Tesla is selling cars and the good, trusted, reliable dealership model, it will do very bad things to the public image of America's beloved car dealers when Tesla leaves its owners high and dry.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, really.
Those are three. I had an hour-long interview with this fellow. Those are the three arguments that car dealers of America use to say why it's a good thing for you, the car buyer, that they are making Tesla's sales model illegal.
That they can screw you over with dealerships. Okay, well, talking about that. Jim Appleton, who's the president of the New Jersey Dealers Trade Group, he's the one who's been talking to CNN, and he said, essentially, Tesla's been given a stay of execution for 15 days. It appears to be... Now, I don't know where Jim Appleton gets say-so for doing this. I suspect he's just got friends in the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission. I didn't say that either. But he said there needs to be a pathway for them, Tesla, to come into compliance with franchise laws. And essentially, this 15-day extension is so that some of the legislation being discussed in the New Jersey houses can be sought through. But also this week in Ohio, Tesla reached a compromise with the auto dealer unions there. There's now, at least it's been passed by the Senate Finance Committee in Ohio, and it will move now onto the houses for votes. An amendment to SB 260, which was the one that was supposed to shut down Tesla in Ohio, has now added a clause that allows the addition of a third Tesla store in Ohio, and Tesla seems quite happy with that. But the really fun ones... Sorry, John.
Sorry, go on. No, go on. Sorry.
The really fun ones are what's going on in Arizona and Texas right now. Both Arizona and Texas legislatures have been particularly unhappy with Tesla, not seen Tesla as a particularly nice business model, because a lot of the people involved, the elected officials, are involved in the car trade and have obviously powerful lobbyists behind them. But Tesla comes along and goes, we're thinking about building a massive factory in your neighborhood, maybe. This bit in Mesa looks pretty good. And Arizona suddenly goes, yes, it does, doesn't it? Would you like to sell your cars in our state? And Texas, same thing. John, quick few seconds or few minutes on that.
Tesla is a very clever company in a lot of ways. There are perfectly good business reasons for the 4 states that they chose and announced as final candidates for the Gigafactory. California is actually a lousy place to make things, and They didn't have California on their short list, but they had Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and Nevada, 2 of which allow them to sell cars, 2 of which don't. And they're only going to pick one state, but they probably won't announce the final decision until the 2 that don't allow them to have changed their laws. It's the whole Tesla dealer thing. I actually have trouble keeping up with the news because literally every day there's a new piece of news. You probably have the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But it is a fascinating window into American political alignment. I think it's safe to say that as of the beginning of this year, Tesla was allowed to sell proportionately in more blue states, the progressive Democratic ones, than red states, the ones that lean more Republican and conservative, despite the notion that in general red states are ostensibly more in favor of untrammeled business, and businesses do what they like. So you get some splits there that sort of come up against this political reality that state car dealers are a very powerful lobbying force who give a lot of money to state politicians and have done so for 70 or 80 years now. Things like, in regard to your Tesla thing, Tesla Governor Rick Perry came out, Texas Governor.
I was going to say, that was a Freudian slip.
Yeah, really. Texas Governor Rick Perry came out a couple of days ago and essentially said, well, I think Tesla ought to be allowed to sell cars the way it wants in Texas, which has probably the most restrictive laws of any state. So it's a fascinating political battle on a lot of levels. And, you know, Tesla has this habit in battleground states of taking governors and important state legislatures and letting them drive Teslas around for an hour or so, which tends to convert them. But many more news items on this, I'm sure, to come, and we'll probably talk about it again. But really fascinating to watch. Yeah.
All right, moving on. This is a story that we're just going to touch on very lightly. This week, the BMW i3 BEV, the electric version of the i3, appeared on the California Center for Sustainable Energy Clean Vehicle Rebate Project list. Did I say that right, John?
Yes, well done.
Thank you. It is essentially the list of cars that you can buy in California and get some form of remuneration for doing so. If you buy an all-electric or a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, you can claim up to $2,500 in rebates. If you buy a range-extended EV or plug-in hybrid, you can generally get $1,500 off. And then there's a load of NEVs, neighborhood electric vehicles, and motorbikes and scooters at the bottom. The amount you can claim off those depending on the vehicle's price and capabilities. So the i3 range extended version, the BEV-X, is still not on the list, which is not really a surprise. BMW is remaining quite quiet on the matter. The HOV lane green stickers are running out. There are rumblings that say that this is all down to the fact that the BMW i3 BEV-X is essentially a new class under the California Air Resources Vehicle Classification System. A vehicle like it has never been tested before, and so it's obviously taking a bit longer to test. It's also worth pointing out that we don't know for sure if this means that the car will never be on the list. It just isn't so far. So that in a sense, is non-news, isn't it, John?
Yes, and it's worth pointing out that there are different rules within California for the amount of the rebate and the administration of white versus green carpool lane stickers.
Right.
Every different incentive has a different set of qualifying rules.
They just love their legal system over there.
Yeah, well, it stems back to California being able to set its own rules because of its historically horrific air pollution.
Yeah.
But the creation of this notion of a BEV-X, which is predominantly a battery vehicle for most of its range, but has this other gasoline thing to give it more range, but not as much as its battery range, was really for the third different set of things, which is the gold and silver credits under CARB's ZEV rules, which are yet another set of rules. So anyway, there are all of these different qualifying processes. We didn't do this story despite getting some sort of news there was some non-news this week.
Yeah.
We'll wait and see what they decide.
Now, it's worth mentioning also that the BMW i3 is just about to start deliveries, which is one of the reasons we covered it. But also a more interesting story, which I have to thank Dennis for, who's one of our regulars, who watches Transport Evolved and talks with us a lot off air. He noticed this week that there is a move in the California legislature to increase the number of green HOV lane stickers from the 40,000 that are currently limited by law to 85,000. And it has been passed this week, I think it was yesterday, by the committee that had been assigned the task of examining that bill. It's now going to go on to both houses to be voted on, and if it does get passed, it means that instead of there being a 40,000 car limit to the number of HOV lane stickers that can be issued, it will go up to 85,000. There's probably less than 1,000 stickers left now, because they are literally flying off the shelves. I don't know what you call them. They're being assigned at a very quick rate. Let's put it like that. Last week,
and there's an historical precedent for this too. They allowed, I think it was 65,000 or 70,000 yellow stickers for hybrids back in the days when California wanted to incent the purchase of certain high mileage hybrids. And then they added, I think it was an additional 10,000 once that lot ran out, taking them to about the same level as the proposed increase in green stickers. White stickers at the moment are not limited. You can have an unlimited number of white stickers, but still, between all of the different plug-in hybrids and range-extended electric cars, I would venture to say the carpool lane has a load of Leafs, some Teslas, and all the rest are plug-ins.
And I would also say that in certain areas of Silicon Valley now, the carpool lane is pretty full anyway.
Yeah. Well, all the freeways are full of carpool lanes, just catching up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And the other thing to bear in mind is that this is not indefinite. The current carpool lane program is set to run until January 1st, 2019. I think that's when it ends. Like so the end of December 2018, beginning of January 2019. All right, moving on. Renault Zoe is a car that we've driven here at Transport Evolved. And we had mixed views about it, partly because of the way its trim we didn't feel was necessarily up to standard. But it has just won the 5th annual Monte Carlo Zen Rally. This is not for Buddhist monks. This is for Zero Emissions, No Noise. It's like a mini version of the Monte Carlo Rally. And there were 3 Renault Zoes competing this year out of a field of 18 vehicles. And it beat everything from, Tesla Roadsters to Nissan Leafs to Think Cities to win the title. A couple of interesting facts from this. In each of the individual stages, there were in total, there were 4 different classifications that the vehicles had to be tested in. And the Zoe came top in all of them. And in some cases, in 2 of those classes, in fact, a Renault Zoe placed in the top 3 other than the one that came first. So it was either Zoe something else or Zoe something else Zoe. So did really, really well in that particular event. And the winning car at no point fell below 45% full on its battery pack, partly due to the chameleon charger, which allows it to recharge quickly between stages. Well done to Renault.
They must not have been recording the no noise thing when it was plugged in. Sorry.
It makes a lot of noise. Yeah, anyone who's... I don't know if you've seen the Zoe up close, John.
Just at auto shows, never on the road or in operation.
So the noise that its chameleon charger makes is loud. It makes a high-pitched whining.
To be fair, it's about the same as a CHAdeMO rapid charger makes when it's putting power into the Leaf. It's
very, very high pitch. But it got me thinking, which electric car would you want to take on a rally and why? We've got some very exciting news. We're not going to tell you yet. We're probably going to be able to tell you next week. We've got some very, very exciting news in Transport Evolved. We might be doing a rally later this year. Let's leave it like that. And we want to know which car you'd take rallying and why that is electric. Mark, which one would you take and why?
Oh, see, I want to go old school Tesla. I'd run a Roadster, I think. Mainly because a lot of these rallies go through some absolutely stunning locations, and to drive along with the top down in a sports car, I think would be my ideal way. Plus, I've never driven a 2-seater sports car, so that would always be good.
John?
A lot of it, as Mark says, depends on the route, but so I've got sort of a choice of two. If it's not a lot of twisty mountain roads and whatnot, then a Tesla Model S, simply for range. If it's more urban or a lot more sort of close-in handling and so forth, then probably the Volkswagen e-Up.
Oh, excellent. We're not going to say any more than that because that was the car I was going to pick as well. And we're going to talk about that car in the next section. So that's a perfect cliffhanger. Watch the ad. Don't skip it, because if you watch it, you're helping us. We'll be right back. It's the third and final part of Transport Evolved. I forgot my teeth there for a second. And we are talking Volkswagens. As you just heard, John recommended the Volkswagen e-Up. He was over in Europe recently, and we were both in Berlin. About a week
who
apart.
wasn't in Berlin? Who wasn't? Who didn't get to go on the cool trip?
Sorry, Mark.
Would that be you, Mark?
It would be me.
But Mark has driven the e-Up, so he can join in the e-Up thing here. Now, last week, I think it was for 2 weeks actually, because there was the Audi annual press conference, which was also at Tempelhof, wasn't it, John?
Yes, I wasn't at that one. It was the VW meeting. But...
And then there was a Volkswagen press event and public event for electromobility. Volkswagen rolled out its entire historic vehicle fleet of electric vehicles, some of which I understand are not functioning. In fact, most of them are not driving. They are just static display vehicles, which made me very sad. But they did let me sit in a Volkswagen Mark II City Stromer because I used to own one. And it was very sad. I had this sort of little pool of motoring journalists looking on as I very excitedly went over the car and explained what all the different bits did. And everyone thought I was either sad or stupid. I'm not sure which. But John, you and I both got to drive the Volkswagen Golf, the e-Golf, which is a very, very competent car. You got to drive the e-Up for the very first time, which is Volkswagen's sort of mini car for Europe. Mark's driven the e-Up before because we had on press loan, but we also got to drive the GTE, which is Golf's sporty plug-in hybrid. Not yet in production. We got to drive pre-production versions. But John, why don't you tell us a little bit about the event from your angle, what you gleaned from it?
Well, the US or North America is going to get the e-Golf in certain areas, starting in California and Northeast, as predictable. But Volkswagen very much feels that plug-in hybrids are going to be preferred by North Americans. And I suspect they feel that about Germans, too. So while they did all the usual dog and pony show for the e-Golf, they seemed, to me at least, and tell me if this was the impression you got, more excited about the possibilities for the Golf GTE, which is their sort of small 1.4-liter engine with a 7-speed TSG gearbox and an electric motor with a battery pack that will take it, I'm going to say, sort of 18 to 25 miles, depending on where the ratings come out.
Yeah, I think it's going to have about that. I would probably say at this point that I didn't get a chance to drive it more than literally round a Volkswagen test track.
I don't think any of us
on
did.
One particular occasion, it
wasn't going off the field.
No, and it was a supervised drive, so you had an engineer with you. And when I went, they told me to floor it at one point, and so I really did. But once I hit about 100 kilometers an hour, which is about 60 miles an hour, they told me to back off, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if you experienced that, John.
Not that large of a handling course on not that big of an airfield, frankly. But yes, they sort of took it up to there and then said, right, now enjoy the regenerative braking. Yes. But I don't know. Of the three cars, I have to say the e-Up was my favorite, and it's top of mind because I just did that article on Green Car Reports this morning. But I've always liked the Up. They had one here in North America just to show off for Americans and sort of tease us with things we can't get, because that car was never designed to come to North America.
Something you will call forbidden fruit, right?
Yes, exactly. And, it really reminded me of my Mark I Golf. I had 2 of them back in the 80s, and lovely cars. The thing about the E-Up is the gasoline Up is a simple, fun, sort of basic car that does what it does fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
The E-Up is an enormous improvement in refinement, quiet, even to some extent handling over a car that has a 1-liter 3-cylinder gasoline engine.
Yes. Yeah.
And the difference is much more noticeable for me than the difference between the Mark I Golf and the E-Golf.
Yes.
The E-Golf is sort of the adult car.
Yes.
It's the Golf is no longer sort of a small flingable car. It's 2 sizes up from that. The E-Golf is exactly what you'd expect. It's quiet, it's competent, it accelerates decently, it handles nicely, it's got a very nice interior, it's refined. It is the Golf with an electric powertrain.
Yes.
And, it'll be fine for what it is. It's a good car. It's very good sort of for their out of the blocks. The E-Up is just more fun. It's more flingable. It's the urban warrior. You can turn it around quickly. I've always liked the Up, and this sort of was the perfect Up for me.
Yeah.
Golf GTE, we all drove pre-production prototypes, and they've got more integration work to do in terms of getting all the bits and pieces to play nice with each other, in my view.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I'll kind of reverse what you said, and I'll go backwards. The GTE, the thing that I noticed most was the gearbox was very slow. For a triple clutch DSG gearbox with 7 speeds, it was incredibly slow. The engineers told me that eventually they plan to use the electric motor, which I think is 80 kilowatts, to smooth over the transition. So essentially, when you change gear, the motor will kick in and kind of smooth over. A lot of people got very confused because they said, "Oh, the gearbox is changing. The electric motor's going through the gearbox." I said, "No, what they're doing is when you go and you've got paddle shift gearbox or Tiptronic on the gear lever, when you go through the gears, even if you're in electric mode, if you tap through the gears, or the car switches through the gears, so that if you need to put the engine on, it's in the right gear for the speed you're traveling at. So that's the reason why you see the gear changing."
Yeah, makes sense. So the car is ready to use the engine at any point.
Right.
You what you wouldn't want is you're going along at 70 miles an hour, and then the battery goes, "I've got no power," and the engine goes, "Well, I'm in first gear." Yes. That's not a good idea.
It's not a good one. And I think part of the thing about the DSG gearbox, John, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it pre-selects the next gear as well.
Yes. And the issue with the DSG is that you don't have the torque converter sort of to buffer those changes. It's a very fast manual gearbox. And that, to me, those sort of abrupt changes, they're very sporty, but they're kind of antithetical to what I tend to expect out of an electric car. So I definitely, they'll have more work just to make them play nice. The only car they've done this way so far is the Jetta Hybrid, which I think is a North American only car.
It is.
But getting a DSG to play with an electric motor is something that hasn't been done thus far.
Right.
Very sort of German solution. But
although
using the electric motor to sort of pad those changes will make it much smoother.
Isn't Porsche doing exactly that with the 918 Spider?
Yes, which I have not driven.
Which I assume uses the same group technology.
The Porsche has such power
that
I think it's actually, it may use sort of bits of the architecture or software, but the hardware is entirely different. Our Nelson Ireson actually did drive it and came back raving.
Right.
In a good way.
I'll have to chat with him about that. The other thing that I noticed about the GTE is it's a very heavy car. You can feel the difference between it and the e-Golf. The e-Golf felt very cemented, but I agree with you. I absolutely concur with what you said about it doesn't feel like the chuckable Golf of days gone by. The whole hot hatch thing. I think the GTE has the potential to be a hot hatch, but it is such a big car. They are both. The Mark 7 Golf is a big car, and it's kind of lost that innocence that it had in the 70s and 80s. But onto the E-Up. I can see where you're coming from, John, when you say it reminds you of the early Golf, Mark 1 Golf. It reminded me of the original Isogonus designed Mini. It is so chuckable. I don't know if you guys use that in the States, but we would use that in England. It's chuckable, and it's designed for almost specifically for British roads, I feel. You know, I took it down country lanes, and I've talked about this before. I took it down country lanes with my kids in the back, and I was able to go 10 or 20 miles an hour faster down country lanes in the E-Up than I was in my Leaf. Partly because it was narrower, but partly because I felt in so much more connected to the road and to the world around me. Very quiet, very refined. The power to weight ratio, I need to work that out, because I have a feeling the power to weight ratio of that car is far better than any other car. And Volkswagen said actually the E-Up is the most efficient. The claim it made was it is the most efficient electric car, the most efficient car, period, in production in the world at the moment.
It's also the most powerful in the up range as well, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So the electric car in that range is better in terms of 0 to 60 than any other car in that range. It was a stunning car, and I think I described it as a phrase that was given to our friend Robert Llewellyn when he was doing Red Dwarf. Yeah. It was a double fried egg chili chutney sandwich. when you look at all the different bits of it, so the 0 to 60 isn't brilliant, the size of it isn't brilliant, the shape, you look at all of the bits individually and kind of go, this isn't going to be that good, and then you get into it, and it's fun, it's nimble, it takes corners as if it was glued to the ground. It's an amazing car. And what's really worrying me is that it got me so excited for the e-Golf, and then talking to various people who've driven the e-Golf, it doesn't seem like the e-Golf lives up to the E-Up, which is
I would
odd.
say that the e-Golf is a very different car. It's more of an executive car. The E-Up is something...
It's an adult car.
Yeah. The E-Up is something that you can imagine giving, if you're wealthy enough, to your late teen child to go off to university in or whatever. And someone in the chat room was also questioning chuckable, what we mean by that. What I mean by that is, if you think about most British country roads are, we've got undulating hills, it's twisty, there's lots of brake action. And because of that regenerative braking, and we haven't talked about the regenerative braking, the user configurable regenerative braking. If you put the regenerative braking either into B mode, which is the most severe braking, or into D3, which is the most severe engine simulated braking, you can pretty much one pedal drive that car round country lanes.
Which I was not able to do so much with the e-Golf, which was a bit
agreed.
disappointing.
Yeah. And
by the way, the American synonym for chuckable might be tossable.
Right. You see, in the UK, that was...
I know.
They've definitely got a different meaning in the
UK. Two nations separated by a common language.
Yes. And sexual innuendo. So yeah, I mean, I think, and because it's got 4 wheels, the 4 wheels are at each corner.
Well done.
Interestingly, I would say what the E-Up reminded me of, for North American folks, is the Chevy Spark EV, which is
someone's just said that in the chat room, actually.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's by far the most powerful Spark. You know, it'll run rings around a gasoline Spark. But it's about that same form factor and size. It's a usable but small 5-door hatchback, but it's also really fun and peppy to drive. Unfortunately, it's a compliance car, so there'll only be sort of those low volumes. But the E-Up, in thinking about it, reminded me about that. My bigger worry, I think, in general with these cars is I would assume that Volkswagen is losing money on the battery electrics, as car makers tend to do in the first generation. They're very, very good efforts for the fact that Volkswagen is just now introducing its first battery electric vehicles. And as someone pointed out, VW is the only company that has 2 different passenger vehicles that are battery electrics Nissan has the Leaf, and maybe in Europe in the future you'll be able to include the sort of passenger version of the NP200. But right now, VW's got the e-up and the e-Golf, and they're totally different cars.
And
so
in Renault, obviously, Renault in Europe is slightly different.
How committed are they? How are they going to price them? Are they really going to push them? Or are they doing this and producing sort of good cars because that's what they do to tick the box?
Yeah. Interestingly, it's the price of the e-up that disappoints, because it's nearly £20,000 in the UK after government grant. And at that point, you look at it and you go, okay, I'm going to own the car outright, but it's still really expensive.
How does that compare to a petrol up? Sorry,
that's about twice as expensive, isn't it, Mark?
Sorry, the e-up compared to the petrol up.
Yeah,
it's coming up to twice as expensive, which is the big problem with that car. And even when we spoke to Volkswagen at their sort of launch event for this, they said they were only planning on selling about 250 of them in the UK this year.
Actually, I will correct you, because I've done some more digging into that. So what Volkswagen has said is it's essentially because of the hype of the cars, and I don't know if this is true or not, and it's doing the same thing with the e-Golf. It's essentially pre-ordering a batch of about 100 to 250 cars in both instances that will be delivered to the UK, that will be distributed to dealers so people can buy them. If you then decide you want a particular type of car that you want, you test drive the e-up or the e-Golf, and you want one in a particular color or in a particular trim, it then has to come from the factory as a build to order option, which is something completely alien to our US listeners. But in the UK, that's quite common. You order the car and they look at the inventory and go, well, this one's just come off the factory production line. It'll come to you in 2 weeks. And then you wait for 2 weeks to get your car. And that's what Volkswagen said, because Volkswagen's had this dog and pony show. I don't know if it did with you, John, about how this manufacturing process that it's now developed is very much along the same modular lines as Ford claimed to have for the Ford Focus. Although arguably, I would say far better implemented, because the cars seem to have a far better practical use. There's no luggage space taken up by battery packs as there is in the Focus and the C-Max Energy and C-Max plug-in hybrid. But the drivetrains can be literally just swapped in, and Volkswagen was very open and said, look, if only a few people want these, then we make a few. If suddenly this car really takes off, we don't have to change anything in our production facility. We are making our own batteries and our motors. We will just make more of them and put them in. So on that side, it sounds a little bit more like Nissan, what Nissan's saying with its vehicles.
They're just pre-ordering a certain number.
Just to point out, John, in Europe, of course, Renault makes multiple electric vehicles. We've got the Kangoo and the Zoe. But I would argue that neither of them match anything that Volkswagen's doing. And I will predict, if Volkswagen does bring both of these cars to market and sells them at sensible prices, at the moment they're highly priced, but I think that price will come down just like they did with the Leaf. And we talk about these prices now and moan about them. We have to remember that the Leaf over the last 3 years has dropped, 6,000-7,000 in price?
If not a little bit more, because the Leaf version that we've got is probably comparable with the middle spec one now.
So, that will happen. So it's going to be an interesting one. Let's move on to our next story, which is, in fact, the Vauxhall Ampera. For those who don't know, the Vauxhall Ampera is the UK equivalent of the Chevy Volt. It's made on the same Detroit production line. It has a different front and a different back. It's essentially the same car underneath. It's sold in Europe as the Opel Ampera. I'm not going to go into why we've got Vauxhall, Europe's got Opel, and everyone else has got GM and Chevy. And Holden in Australia. It's a long, complicated lecture, isn't it, John?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Ampera here has not sold as well as it has done in the US. In the US, the Volt is on almost parity, isn't it, John, with the Leaf? You've got your figures.
Yes, although given, I think, Nissan's plans for ramping up production, I'm expecting the Leaf to outdo the Volt this year, but we'll see. Historically, the Volt did better than the Leaf.
Right. Over here, since it started sales, I believe I'm right in saying that the Leaf has outsold the Volt 5-1. The Volt and the Ampera. So last year, I think 6 months to August last year, to July last year, there were only, was it 7? That would be, to July. What am I talking about? Yeah, 6 months to the start of July. There were 30, I think, Volts sold in the whole of the UK. and about 100 and some Amperas, and was it 800 Leafs, Mark? I'm trying to remember the figures off my head.
The Leaf outsold the Ampera 825 to 150.
Right, there you go.
With only 23 Chevrolet Volts.
23 Chevrolet Volts. So one of them sitting on my driveway.
Yes.
So the dealers have been really struggling. I mean, there's a local dealer near me with an Ampera sitting in their showroom. I'm not joking. It's sat there for a year and a half and it hasn't moved.
Which means at what state would the battery be in when you get it? Have they been taking care of it? Because that's essentially long-term storage.
Yeah.
But it comes down to the fact that it is a very US-styled car. Even the Volt, which is the British version, the Ampera, is very US-looking. It's big, it's aggressive, it's
heavier. It doesn't have the nimbleness that the Leaf does. And
when you get into it, there's so much information around you. And you compare that to the cars that the British and European markets tend to go for, which is smaller city hatchbacks with very kind of sparse, concise interiors. And you can kind of see why it doesn't quite fit. There is a market for that kind of car here. So I wonder if it is a marketing issue rather than a it doesn't fit at all. There is definitely a space for it. But
well, okay, let's talk about the story itself, which is there are dealers now in the UK, and we're not just talking a few, we're talking many. Some of them are parts of chains. There seems to be this price war that are knocking £5,000 off the sticker price of an Ampera. Now, this time last year, the Ampera and the Volt were well over £30,000. Then last autumn, Vauxhall knocked, I think it was 3,000 off the price, which brought it down to sort of 26, 27. 29. And then with the £5,000 government grant, that brings you down even further. But now there's these dealers that are selling it for as low as 23,000, which brings it into Leaf territory, which is insane. And there are people, I've had 4 people contact me since we ran this story saying, yeah, I've just bought one because it's that cheap. John, is this the start of the UK price wars, do you think, similar to what you saw last year in the States?
Possibly. I don't know enough about the UK market to say much intelligent. In sort of at a high level, GM is still sorting out its strategy for Opel. They just announced this morning that they're pulling Opel out of China because Chevrolet is their dominant brand there.
Right.
They announced a few weeks ago they're no longer going to sell Chevrolets except for sort of specialty cars like the Corvette. In Europe, Opel and Vauxhall will be their main brands there. So, those brands are going through a bit of self-determination, identity crisis stuff. And I suspect that with the Ampera and Volt being not very large inside, sort of the size of a Prius, but not as practical as a Prius,
right?
And expensive, and a new concept, and sold in 2 different varieties, it's just a bit confusing for dealers. You and I have talked before about UK dealers in large part not being particularly excited about electric cars anyway. So a lot of things lined up against it. My bet is the price reductions you're seeing now are basically to clear existing stock.
And also I think to try and nab some of the BMW i3 customers, because in Europe, the BMW i3 comes in just under a Chevy Volt, I understand, Mark. Does that sound about right?
Sorry, I missed all of that sentence. I was trying to catch up with the chat room at the
Chatting
time.
with the chat room. I said
I do
think
my
it's something
job.
to do with the BMW i3 is not
Yes.
far off the price of an Ampera stroke Volt as it stood. So actually dropping that price might encourage people who would otherwise go with the BMW i3 or the i3 Rex.
I believe so, and I think the
i3
i3's
or the Ampera.
I think the i3's already got a lot more market penetration in terms of awareness as well. I know of more people who have no interest in electric cars, so they're just they don't really think about cars, but they know what the i3 is, but don't know what the Ampera is. I've chatted to people who think the i3 is the first kind of range extended electric vehicle, and I don't know where they've got that information from. I should really ask and try and find out, but I wonder if Vauxhall is seeing that BMW's come into the market with a much more, anecdotally anyway, high-profile car than theirs that's been on the market for 2 years.
It's an interesting thing. There is a lot of misinformation in the electric car world and about the electric car world that I see. Also, even from people who've just bought them. I encountered a guy yesterday at a charging station in Cardiff who was sat there charging his car, and he didn't really understand how to remove the Chatterley quick charge connector from his car. And I ended up helping him because it was going to get broken otherwise. It's simple things like that. And you said you spoke to someone recently who couldn't get, who was convinced that the i3 used AC quick charging. And
and yesterday when I got my car MOT'd, I had to explain how to remove the Chatterley connector from my car to one of the service people, because they always had trouble with it. They didn't understand. I can never get the connector out, not knowing that you have to press the button on the top twice. It's not a simple connector, the Chatterley connector.
No.
Or the one we use in the UK anyway.
There are a couple of stories we haven't touched on today because they are developing stories, one of which does involve Nissan, Chatterley and Chatterley quick charge networks in the UK and beyond, and a certain manufacturer. I don't feel that we have enough data at the moment to give that story justice. Several people have contacted me saying, you need to put this on the show tonight. We're not going to, because we want to make sure we understand it properly and we've got everybody.
But we are working on getting
we are working on it. And there is another story that we were sent yesterday to do with charging equipment in the UK and DIY charging equipment. Again, same thing. We are sitting back, taking it all in, because we want to represent the stories properly. We want to explain them properly to you, the viewers, listeners, so that we can do it justice. But there is one final story. This is an and finally, and I'm going to credit John with this. John, you sent this to me yesterday. This is your story, so please do take it away. It's to do with, I think what we might say, Ford is schooling Cadillac. John.
Yes. Many of the listeners may remember there was an ad released by Cadillac in the States for its ELR, the range extended electric luxury coupe, essentially a much nicer two-door Volt. But it was a rather polarizing ad. It's called Poolside. Stars the actor Neil McDonough, who has played with his pale blue-gray eyes a variety of really disturbingly psychopathic people on television. And it's essentially talking about how the American way of life is better. We work hard because we do it for the joy of it and because we get nice houses and pools and so forth out of it. It throws in some sneers at unnamed nations who take a month off in the summer. Imagine the horror. And even a bit of French. There's some debate as to whether or not the ad was meant to be tongue-in-cheek. It has proven enormously polarizing. So a lot of people really just viscerally loathed it. A lot of other people sort of went, rah-rah, yes, this is the kind of good American advertising for the American way of life.
Now, it's really interesting, John, because I'm playing this ad with the sound off, partly so that people can see it. But it's really interesting because I heard a story that said that this ad was initially designed for a different car.
That's correct. You may actually have read it on Green Car Reports. We got it out of an interview done by the fellow Mike Golias, who covers GM for Automotive News. There's a new marketing director at Cadillac who was apparently sort of came in and got this ad 2/3 of the way through All he would say was, this ad originally had another Cadillac vehicle in it. He wouldn't say which one. My suspicion is that it's the Escalade, the gigantic, blingy 7-seat, full-sized SUV, beloved of wealthy families and rap stars. Imagine how annoying the ad may have been with a gigantic SUV in it. Anyway, they swapped in the ELR. The ad came out. They ran it, I think, was it during the Sochi Olympics or during a sporting event? I forget.
I think it was in the Olympics.
Super Bowl?
And I think it was Super Bowl as well.
Super Bowl. There we go.
I'm running. I've now queued up the other ad. So,
yes. So Ford,
tell us about the next one.
Came out, or one of Ford's agencies very quietly came out with what you might call a spoof of the ad, which essentially says, no, we work hard because we can do good stuff. And
they stroll to the market and buy locally grown food.
And it features a woman named Patshawn Murray, who runs something called Detroit Dirt, which actually gathers food scraps, turns them into mulch in order to grow sustainable food.
Whatever.
Fruits and vegetables
I collect food
in the
scraps
city of
from
Detroit.
Restaurants, manure from zoos,
which is kind of wonderful on a lot of levels.
Do you know
because
why?
instead of an arrogant, middle-aged white guy, you've got a young, passionate black woman who's doing something to help her community.
Look,
and at the very end of the ad,
with a fantastic haircut.
You believe that anything is possible.
Indeed, yes.
And
those
you
of us
try
from
to
New
make
York
the world
would call it
better.
a Dante haircut, or
As for helping the city
Dante
grow
Natural,
green, healthy
in reference to the
vegetables,
son of
that's
the new
the
mayor of
upside
New
of
York
giving a
City,
damn.
who has
N'est-ce pas?
even bigger afro. But in any event, at the end of this video, which just was sort of quietly dropped onto YouTube and gathered a lot of viral steam.
Yeah, yesterday.
She plugs in a charging cable to a Ford C-Max Energy plug-in hybrid.
Right. And
well done, Ford.
And it mimics the camera angles and the camera style, and some of the dialogue. And some of the dialogue. And I love the way that she is obviously carrying off this faux pomposity. And at the end, her n'est-ce pas is done with just enough sass that it leaves you in absolute no doubt that this is a direct dig at Cadillac. Although Ford itself has said, no, we are not taking the mickey out of Cadillac.
Yeah.
How could we have possibly turned around an advert that quickly?
Oh.
There was a really fun and you should all go and listen to it. This American Life is a really, really great podcast. Even if you don't live in America, it's a great podcast. It's produced by Public Radio, and there was an episode a couple of weeks ago about feeling home, feeling your home identity and the things that made you feel nice about your where you live. And back in the 70s or 80s, there was a song that went around that was played on all the local television stations and all the local radio stations in a particular city, talking about how amazing this city was and how it was the best place in the country, or the best place in the world, and it was the only place you'd want to live. And it turns out that there was a composer who went round changing the words for each city and the references for each city. So all these different cities in America grew up with this impression that this one song, which some people even still sing today as a kind of with some kind of local pride, was actually duplicated and churned out in, I think, over 100 different variants.
Nice.
And you should listen to this particular episode of This American Life. I'll try and find the link and put it in the show notes. It was hilarious and it's great. And it reminded me a little bit of this advert, or the advert reminded me a little bit of that. So I think Ford are quite obviously taking the mickey, but hey, I thought it was just brilliant. So there we go. And that is the end of the show today. John, thank you very much for joining us. Where can people find out about what you get up to?
Thank you as always for having me. Come visit Green Car Reports at www.greencarreports with an S. And I should mention as well, by the way, if you want to, we have a daily email. Just sort of look down the right-hand column for news in your inbox. It turns out a lot of our readers get this email. It goes out around noon Eastern time, 5 p.m. British time, 9 a.m. California time. And we get a lot of people reading our stories that way, but it's just everything we published over the last 24 hours.
Yep.
Green Car Reports. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, and come again, and thank you for coming on at short notice. We wanted someone from New Jersey who understood what was going on there.
I am not from New Jersey.
You're not New Jersey. You are a little bit further over, which is what I'm going to say.
Sorry.
Yeah, you see, there's nobody in New Jersey wanted to speak to me because they were all obviously just completely engrossed in the result of the official investigation.
I apologize for the outburst. I am from New York State.
I know you are from New York State.
And New Jersey.
Anyway.
Anyway.
I know that, but you were I don't want to say you were the next best thing. You were the person with enough knowledge in the areas.
Of New Jersey.
That's it. That's it. There we go. Thanks very much for joining me,
John.
Thanks everybody, and as always, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.